Hey, I'm going to ask you please to take your Bibles, please, to 1 Kings chapter 18. And we're in a series on Elijah. This is our third message, and next week we'll conclude with a message on depression. And so maybe you want to be here for that. Invite others if you would. I want to start off by saying this, that one of my favorite blogs is called lifehacker.com. I don't know if you know what that blog is, but it basically teaches you how to do everything better and gives all kinds of suggestions. On there, I read a post not too long ago about 10 difficult decisions that you're going to make in life. I want to give them to you. Maybe you're going through some of these right now. Here's number 10, choose a college major. Number 9, decide on a career. Number 8, make a career change. Number 7, go back to school to get an advanced degree. Number 6, figure out where to live. Number 5, to rent or buy a house. Number 4, who to go on a date with. Number 3, to get married or not. Number 2, to have children or not. And number 1 is know when it's time to quit anything. I want to ask you this question. Have you ever wavered between making a decision between multiple options? Or perhaps when it comes like decision-making time, there are so many decisions on the board, you don't know which decision to make, and you just become paralyzed. Some of you are aware, about a year and a half ago, within a span of like 7-8 months, we were in 2 car accidents that totaled both cars. Neither one of them were our fault. If you want to give me driving instructions afterwards, feel free if that makes you feel good. But neither one of them were our fault. So we had to go out and purchase 2 new cars. I don't know about you. I do not like picking a new car. There are so many decisions and options, and I get so confused, I don't know what to do. So what we did is we chose car 1, and it seemed to go okay. And so what we did when it came to car 2, we actually picked the exact same car. Same make, same model, different color, all right? So we got a Toyota Camry, one's gray and one's black, all right? That's how we made our decision with that. James chapter 1 says this, a double-minded person, in other words, someone that is trying to make decisions, is unstable in all their ways. You see, wavering is not a place of health emotionally, physically, or spiritually. Wavering between 2 decisions can produce instability. For some of you, that's where you're at. You're wavering between some decisions, and you got all kinds of instability in your life. There are things in life that you have to make a decision on. Even though it often feels easier sometimes, like, to not make a choice. Have you ever ordered tickets on Ticketmaster or any of those sites? Have you ever done that? What happens, you get on those sites, you have exactly 2 minutes from the time, something like that, from the time you request your number of tickets to make all the other decisions before it kicks you out and cancels your order. So you're sitting there and the countdown clock's going on, 1:55, 1:50, 1:30, 1:20, 1:10, and you're thinking, does this date work out? Did I check with my spouse? Do I need to check with him again? Is this going to work out for all the family members? And you're looking at the count, and it keeps going down and down and down and down. The pressure starts building. You got to make a decision. Do I want to click buy? And then it says, do you want to be in the mezzanine section? I don't even know what the mezzanine section is, right? And I'm sitting there, and all this is going through my mind. And what happens is, if you don't make your choice, they kick you out, and your tickets are gone forever. Sometimes, it feels easier in life to not make a choice, but then not to make a choice becomes in itself a choice. We're looking in 1 Kings. Israel is at a point where they're making a choice in regards to God. They've been going on without making one, and Elijah's going to say, you have to make a decision. Because if you don't make a decision, that in itself is a decision. That's where a lot of people are with God. They've not rejected God per se, but they haven't fully decided on God either. You see, wavering between 2 decisions produces instability. When we waver between 2 things, God or something, it produces instability in our lives. Let me give you the context before I read here 1 Kings 18. Israel has been on a downward spiral for about 200 years. They began to worship a lot of other gods besides Jehovah. There's a guy, though, his name is Ahab. Excuse me, he's kind of a worshiper of Jehovah. He gave his kids God-honoring names. Like he named one of his kids Ahaziah, which means owned by Jehovah. Another he named Jehoram, Jehovah is exalted. So on the one side, he looks low, he's worshiping Jehovah God. But then on the other side, he actually marries a woman who's really the wicked witch of the West. Right? What's her name? Do you know what her name is? Say it. Say it louder, please. Jezebel. Good. All right. So he's married to Jezebel, and what Jezebel does is she actually kills a bunch of the prophets of God, and she's trying to make Baal the state religion. Ahab won't do anything about it. He's kind of a wimp. He's kind of spineless. So what God does is he raises up a real man of God, a prophet they call him, named Elijah. And his mission is to show that there is one true God, Jehovah, and to call Israel back to him. You know, a lot of times we'll look at these silly, primitive people with all their gods and we'll think, you know, we are so much more advanced than these people. But here's what I want to give to you today. All humans are worshipers. All humans are worshipers. We all find something that we put our worth in. You know, we just had, this is called a worship service. That's from an old English word that means worthship. In other words, we all find something to put our value in, our worth in. Something that we find our happiness in. You're like, no, Brent, you don't understand. Not me. I'm not religious. I'm not a worshiper. Then you don't understand how your soul works. You might not be religious in a traditional sense, but you have found something that gives you worth, something that makes life worth living, and you worship that thing. You have to have it. Many times, someone has said this, an idol is not usually a bad thing. It's usually a good thing that we've made a God thing. Let me say that again. A lot of times an idol is not just a bad thing. Sometimes an idol can be a very, very good thing in our life. But what we've done in our life is we have made it a God thing. It's all we ever talk about. For many, money is their primary form of security. You might say, not me, but you're worried about it all the time, aren't you? You're worried about if you're going to have enough. There's nothing wrong with money, but it's a thing that you have to have at all costs. You're worried about it all the time. You're like, well, my money is going to take care of me in the future. Really? To me, I think God is supposed to take care of us in the future. You know, money's just kind of a byproduct of that. You know, for some people, family is fulfillment. When they think of the good life, it always revolves around family. Like you can't imagine being happy in life single or without the perfect family structure. If you're in a bad marriage, you're trying to get out because you think life is going to get better. Some of you are bitter because you don't have the family that perhaps you've always dreamed about. You know, some people find their identity in their accomplishments for years. Like, this is me. I'm going to be vulnerable here a little bit. For me, a lot of times I was devastated if I didn't preach a good sermon on Sunday. You know this happens to me every week, right? I get home and I rehearse everything that I've said all morning long. Shouldn't have said this, should have said this a different way. This didn't seem to connect. I got to do better next week. What can I do different? And you know, after a while I just said, I'm going to stop this. I'm not doing this anymore. Because my identity was not necessarily in being a child of God, but in being admired. You know, there are things that we worship. In our day, there are hundreds of false gods, just like there were in Elijah's day. I want to give you a picture of a quote from a guy from a few hundred years ago. He's a pastor, theologian named John Calvin. He said this, he says, the human heart is an idol factory. Like, can you relate to that? Like, you know what a factory is, right? A factory produces things, it makes things. Well, what Calvin said is that's what the human heart is. It's an idol factory. In other words, in our heart, we are always producing idols. You know what this says to me? That you and I can have as many Baals in our heart right now as Jezebel tried to put in Israel. So don't think like the battle isn't relevant to you. This is a battle that takes place in your heart and in my heart. This is the ultimate battle, which God is God. So I want you to look now at 1 Kings 18. Will you look down, please? If you have your Bibles, your Bible app, or you can follow on the screen in verse 17. It says, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, the one ruining Israel?" He replied, "I haven't ruined Israel, but you and your father's family have, because you have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed the Baals. Now summon all Israel to meet me in Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab summoned all the Israelites. He gathered all the prophets at Mount Carmel. Then Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him." But the people didn't answer him a word. In other words, crickets. They're kicking rocks. You see what Elijah says here? He says, look, if Baal is God, serve him. Go all the way with him. So I tell you this, if money is your God, serve it with all your heart. Get all you can get. If you have to cheat to get it, cheat. If that's the ultimate good. I mean, sacrifice your family or your integrity to get it. See, here's what I can't understand. There are people who will say that God is their God, but they won't obey God with their money and be generous. And so what Elijah is saying here is, how long are you going to waver between two opinions? If God is God, then live for him. If money is God, why don't you give up on God and go with money? See, if the approval of people is your God, teenager, if your job and your goal in life is to please others, then do whatever you can to earn their approval. You'll burn yourself out. You know, there are many teenagers, they get to the end of their high school years and they're like, I spent 4 years trying to please a bunch of people I don't even like. See, but if approval is your God, go all the way. If romance is your God, then go anywhere to find it. Leave your marriage if you must. You feel like getting divorced? Do it. You're like, man, this is something today. If romance is your God, forget about your responsibilities to your kids. Now, I know that probably none of you think like that. I'm just trying to push you to the logical end. I mean, if romance is your God, like, go all the way. But if Christ is the one true God, then serve him with all your heart. I mean, how long will you go wavering between two opinions? A British pastor about 100 years ago, his name was Charles Spurgeon, he said this. He says, if you're going to be saved 100%. You know, most Christians are trying to be a little in the world and a little into God. They're enough into the world to be miserable in God, and they're enough into God to be miserable in the world. For your own sake, choose one way or the other. Stop playing around. Matt Chandler, who's a pastor down in Dallas, who I like, who I follow, he says this, if you don't love Jesus with all your heart, church is a terrible hobby. I want you to think about that. You have to get up each weekend. You come in here to a crowded place. You park. You walk into the Family Life Center. You sit in a big room of people with most of which you don't know. They're always pressuring you to volunteer. You feel guilty. And then you have some guy like me that stands up here and talks at you for 30 minutes. That is a terrible hobby. Matt says it's kind of like you go through Halloween every week. You get all dressed up, you put on your Christian mask, you pretend to be something that you're not, and when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, how's it going? What do you respond? Good, brother. Praise the Lord. And you just lied, right? That's a terrible hobby. See, if you don't love Jesus, if you love Jesus, though, this is a great place to be. Like, I want to show you another image here. Here's basically what I'm saying. Either go big or go home, right? One or the other. In other words, if he's really God, if he is who he says he is, we need to be all in. I mean, don't be a spectator. Like be part of us. Start volunteering. Give generously. Get in a group. Start sharing your faith. Be passionate. Fall in love with Jesus. So all these things that we're talking about are not a drudgery to you. They become a delight. And many of you, you come to church week in week, and you're miserable. I see it in you. You're miserable. Just enough into the world to be miserable in God, and enough into God to be miserable in the world. See, you need to choose one way or the other. We don't need to be wavering between one way or the other. I read this week about a Chinese proverb. It says this: he who try to walk down middle of the road will split his pants. So you can't be wavering. Like, you shouldn't be wavering from one decision to another. See, I can respect a guy like Richard Dawkins. You know who Richard Dawkins is? Professor at Oxford, wrote The God Delusion. Believe it or not, one of my social media friends was walking down the sidewalk this week at Oxford, ran smack dab into Richard Dawkins. I can appreciate a guy like Richard Dawkins who says this: there's not a God. I think I have a picture of him. There's not a God. I'm going to commit my whole life to convince people there's not a God. I'm going to live my life like there's not a God. I can appreciate that. I don't agree with it, but I can appreciate it. I can't understand, though, people who say, I believe there's a God, that's why I go to church Christmas and Easter. But the rest of the time I live for me. See, how long are we going to waver through our life? If God is God, then serve him. If Baal is God, then serve him. So I want to keep going and reading here. Look down at verse 23 and 24 of the passage. Elijah says, let's take 2 bulls, take one, put it on an altar over there. I'll take the other, put an altar over there. Verse 24. Then you call, he says, on the name of your God, and I'll call on the name of the Lord. And he says, the God who answers with fire, he is God. And all the people said, that's fine. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, since you are so numerous, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first. Then call on the name of your God, but don't light the fire. So they took the bull that they gave him, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, Baal, answer us. But there was no sound, no one answered. Then they danced around the altar that they had made, and at noon Elijah mocked them. He said, shout loudly, for he's a God. Maybe he's thinking it over. Maybe he's wandered away. Or maybe he's on the road. Maybe you have a different translation, like the New Living Translation says this. Maybe he's daydreaming. Or literally in the Hebrew, it means maybe your God is like relieving himself. So in other words, the Hebrew euphemism here is, maybe your God's on the John. And maybe the fan's running. And he can't hear you. So yell louder. Let's keep reading. Perhaps he's sleeping and will wake up. What is Elijah doing here? He's really doing some righteous smack talking. And it says, then they shouted loudly, and they cut themselves with knives and spears according to their custom until blood gushed over them. All afternoon they kept raving until the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no sound. No one answered. No one paid attention. I want to give you 3 characteristics now of false gods this morning. First of all, quickly, false gods require strenuous dancing to please them. The true God is known by grace through faith. What do false gods say? If you obey well enough, we'll accept you. So their message is this. Their message is dance harder. Gods like Allah say, you better obey these commands. You better keep these 5 pillars. You better dance harder if you want me to accept you. The Buddhist version of God says, you better act right. If not, you're going to come back as something that you don't want to be. See, secular false gods like popularity or money and beauty say, if you don't dance enough, you will be miserable. So you got to dance. You got to dance like a slave to get into the right school, to get into the right job, to have money. Listen, if beauty is your God, you Zumba hard, right? So you have that beautiful body. Because if your body just isn't perfect and you're not in shape, people aren't going to like you. Like if popularity is your God, you're going to continually dance for the circle of friends. I wear the clothes you want me to wear. I'm doing these things, so you'll say to me, do you like me now? See, every other religion says if you obey, you will be accepted. But the gospel changes that. The gospel says this: I am accepted, therefore I obey. Not I obey, therefore I'm accepted, but I'm accepted by the gift of God's grace, therefore I obey, just as a loving response. See, the gospel's different. Jesus is different than other gods. Here's the second thing I want to point out to you about false gods. False gods mutilate you. The true God mutilated himself for you. They keep saying, work harder, pray harder, do more, obtain more. You're not getting my attention, so you got to cut yourself. You do understand in our culture, do you not? For some, they're not getting the attention they deserve or they want, and they'll cut themselves to get that attention that they crave. For others, it's not actual physical cutting, it's more of a metaphorical one. They slash their bodies through crash diets, or they become anorexic to get that perfect figure. They slash their families by overworking to make that extra money. They slash their souls by compromising their integrity to get everyone's attention or succeed. You want to know what false idols are in your life? Look for the weary dancing and the slashing. They cut themselves to get Baal's attention. However, Jesus was cut for us. Jesus wasn't just killed. His body was mutilated. He wasn't just poisoned, then he died. After he died, his heart was pierced through with a spear that water and blood flowed out. Then he was laid in a grave with a big heavy stone, and a Roman garrison of 12 soldiers put outside of there. Now, I know there aren't degrees of death, but that was really dead. And God answered just as excessively, not by just restarting Jesus' heartbeat, but raising Jesus in power so that he rolled away the stone. He actually scared the Roman guards so bad they passed out. Then he ascended on his own to the right hand of the Father. God was not just showing off. He was not just conquering death. He destroyed it. See, that's different than a false god. Here's the third thing. False gods lead to soul drought. The true God deluges us with living water. I want you to look at verse 30. It says, then Elijah said to all the people, come near me. So all the people approached him. Then he repaired the Lord's altar that had been torn down. I want you to picture this. There's Elijah. He's in a lawn chair. For about 5 hours, he's got his cool shades on. He's watching all this. You know, he's a Hebrew prophet, so he's got a long, Duck Dynasty beard. Can you picture this? He's smack talking them. He's kind of like Uncle Si. And then he slowly, very slowly gets out of his chair. Let's keep reading. It says, Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel will be your name. And he built an altar with the stones in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench around the altar, enough to hold about 4 gallons. He arranged the wood. Now, can I just tell you this? If you're going to build a fire, you don't pour water on it. But that's what he does. He says, cut up the bull. He placed it on the wood. He said, fill 4 water pots with water. Pour it on the offering to be burned in the wood. And he said a second time. They did it a second time. He said a third time. They did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar. He even filled the trench with water. And at the time of offering of the evening sacrifice, the prophet Elijah approached the altar and said, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and I'm your servant, and at the word I've done all these things. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the Lord's fire fell, and he consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. See, the land that was thirsty for 3.5 years now flowed with water. Now, this is a hard one, but let me explain this to you a little bit. There is a sense in which when you come to know the Lord that you say, this is where I've always belonged. See, when you fully find God and that He's the one you've been searching for, this is the country that maybe you've always been homesick, and waters of joy and peace and new life begin to flow through you and out of your parched soul. See, other gods don't satisfy. They leave you thirstier. Other gods, if you fail them, they crush you. Religious gods like Allah or Buddha, if you fail them, they will crush you. Secular gods like popularity and beauty and money say, get me and I'll make you happy. Fail me and you'll be miserable. Jesus says this, if you fail me, I will forgive you. And I will receive you, not on the basis of what you've done, but on the price I paid to save you. See, Jesus is the only God, if you find Him, will satisfy you. And if you fail Him, He'll forgive you. Now, I want you to watch the ending here of this. Let's look at verse 41. Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat, and drink, for there is the sound of a rainstorm. Let's look at verse 45. It says, in a little while, the sky grew dark with clouds and wind. There was a downpour. So Ahab got in his chariot and went to Jezreel. The power of the Lord was on Elijah. He tucked his mantle, in other words, his garments, under his belt, and he ran ahead to Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. Did you catch the little detail there? Elijah outran the chariot. Here's Ahab. He's going along in his chariot. He's riding along. He's sitting in there. And then all of a sudden, here comes Elijah. And he's running so fast. And he's like, see ya, man. See ya. What happened? What happened was when he made the decision that God is God, he wasn't wavering anymore. He wasn't limping along. He ran. And see, when you make the decision to say, you know, God is going to be my God. I'm going to follow God. I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to live for Him 100%. Guess what? When you stop wavering, you'll run. It doesn't mean that you're always going to feel strong. But rather than living in a decision, you begin to soar with daring faith, with exuberant joy, with extravagant sacrifice. That's what I want for each of you. I want you to run. I don't need you to give money to supply for our budget. I don't need you to volunteer to serve in some ministry. I need you to go all in for God, and you will begin to run. You'll begin to soar through generosity and trials. You'll begin to become like a guy that I read about this week. I got a picture of him. His name is A.W. Milne. This guy was part of a group of missionaries. They were called the one-way missionaries. Do you know why they were called the one-way missionaries? Because they weren't expecting to come home. These guys, here's what they actually did. They heard about a place in the world who had never heard the gospel. It was dangerous. And so these guys actually packed their belongings in a coffin. A.W. Milne was one of those brave souls. He'd heard about a tribe on one of the islands in the New Hebrides, a tribe filled with headhunters and cannibals who had martyred just about every missionary that had entered there. And he said he did not fear because he had already died to himself. He actually lived there for 35 years, and he loved and he served those people. When he died, he was buried by the people of that tribe in the most honored place in their village. And this little epitaph was on the gravestone that said this: when he came, there was no light. When he left, there was no darkness. What empowers that? What gives you the ability to live like that? When somebody says this, I have decided to follow Jesus. Do you remember that old little tune? Like, I have decided to follow Jesus, the cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, though none go with me. Still I will follow. Though mom and dad forsake me, though all my friends call me a fool, still I will follow. The cross is enough. Because God is my God, and none of these other things are God. And I am not wavering between serving God and money and all these other things, because I can run through life because God is my God, with the cross before me, and all the world and all my friends just fade in the background. See, that's what I want for some of you. I want you to run. I want you to go hard after God. I want you to give it everything you have. If He is God, let's follow Him with everything that we have. How is Laurel going to be reached with the gospel of Christ? It's by people, Christians from this church and other churches who are all in for God. See, it doesn't do any good. People coming in from the outside, they look at us and they're like, yeah, they look Christian, but they're my neighbor and they're just jerks. They're like, I don't want any of that. What makes a difference when we go all in for God? See, if God's God, man, let's serve Him. But if Baal's God, then go serve Him, please. Help yourself. Don't come here. But if God's God, let's serve Him. Let's go all in for Him. If you look in your worship folder and also in the back with next steps, there's a bunch of next steps that I have listed here. Some of you need to take some of these next steps. Like, what would a next step be for you? Some of you, you need to start serving on a team around here, on a volunteer team. What would that look like? Well, in your worship folder, there's a whole handout in there. I don't know if you saw that or not. There's a flyer in there, and it lists all the ways that you can serve. That means I'm not going to be a consumer anymore. I'm going to be a contributor. And we're starting new service times coming up in August. It won't affect any of you who come to this service. But the 8 o'clock service is moving to 9. We need lots of people to say, once a month, I will commit to serving on a serve team. Maybe you take that sheet and you pray about it and look at it, and you can go back to the next steps table and drop it off on your way out and say, yeah, I'd be willing to serve. Some of you need to join our church. You know, I think believers are belongers. And if you're a believer and say, yeah, I'm a believer, I'm with Jesus, you need to join our church. You need to come to Starting Point. There'll be another one in a few weeks. You can go online and register. You need to say, yeah, I'm going to take that next step, and I'm all in. I'm all in for Jesus. I'm all in for the kingdom. I'm not just going to come and be a spectator. I'm getting involved in this. I'm on the mission. And so for some of you, you need to take that next step. For others of you, you need to get part of a group. You need to get an Equip class. It's going to be starting in September. You need to get in one of our discipleship groups. You need to get in one of our life groups that will meet at 9 o'clock in September. You need to take that step and say, I'm going to grow deeper with a group of people, and I'm going to be involved in that, and I want more information. Some of you need to take that step. But you know, the last step and the most important step is, for some of you, you need to stop playing and say, yeah, I need to follow God. I need Him to be my God. Can I just tell you, if that's your decision, you are among friends here today. We want you to make God your God. We want you to place your flag with Jesus. And so after this service, you can grab me at the door if you want and say, man, I want to know more about how I can make God my God. Maybe you need to just pray about it. There's a prayer room to my left, your right. You go out these side doors here, and there's a place you can pray by yourself. If you want to pray with somebody, there'll be somebody there. But for some of you, you're wavering between opinions. You need to get off the fence. You need to say, man, I need God to be my God.